Can you hear me? Okay, okay. I'll try to speak loudly. Welcome to this evening's edition of the lecture series for the Mildred Berryman Institute for LGBTIQ plus Utah History. Am I doing this wrong? Are you supposed to be doing this or am I?
We're splitting it. So you take
Oh,
the first couple ones and then I take over partway through.
okay.
Yeah.
How do I know when?
Randy puts a little picture of us in the bottom right corner.
Okay. So I'm Connell O'Donovan. I'm the chair, and this is Megan Weiss, our lovely secretary and office siren. No,
Here we go. There you go.
what did you do to do
It
that?
just clicked. Yeah. But you should be able to use
Oh, now, okay.
all of it.
So we exist to promote public education and general knowledge of Utah's queer history, culture, and arts in all their diversity by fostering a collegial atmosphere among LGBTIQ plus Utah researchers. The Berryman Lecture Series educates our community about our history, preserves local narratives, and fosters inclusivity and connection. It also amplifies underrepresented voices and builds a foundation for ongoing community engagement in public history. Your support is really important to us. Thank you, Sheila, and everyone for donations you've ever made in the past. And we certainly welcome more. So we are committed to making historical context and information accessible with as few barriers to entry and access as possible, and therefore all of our events are free and non-ticketed when possible. And like I said, please donate because that really helps us keep going. Right, with our goal this month for Queer History Month is $1,000.
Yeah, I have a slide.
Okay. And then we have a special announcement to make. So I'm going to read this from the other my other computer. We are extremely proud to announce that in a brand new pilot program, the Salt Lake Human Rights Commission and the Mayor's Office of Access and Belonging have selected a proposal made by the Mildred Berryman Institute to install a historical marker at or near the site of the original Sun Tavern.
Yay.
At the corner of North Temple and 400 West. This shows the old Sun Tavern, which is, we call, to make it easier, it's the Sun Tavern 1.0, because then in the early 80s, it moved to a different location, and that's the Sun 2.0. And then now we have the Sun Trap. But so this shows the old Sun at North Temple and 400 West, which is now the northwest corner of the Delta Center, which is in the current photograph that you see. So in this pilot program, only two proposals were selected, and our sister organization, the Semahadithi Foundation for Utah's Black History, is the other organization selected for a placement of a marker downtown. The leaders of Semahadithi, Alice and Robert Birch, really wanted to be here tonight to celebrate, but they're on a very much needed month-long cruise, so bless their hearts. uh, we're grateful for Monique Davila at the Utah Historical Society for inviting us to apply for this program. Thank you to Deb Hall and her organization, Seniors Out and Proud, for submitting with our application a really amazing letter of support. Thank you, Deb. Woohoo!
Thank you.
Will from the Human Rights Commission, thank you for being so supportive and helping us out on this. We're super excited. And then, of course, our own Randy Hoffman. I almost said Randy Newman, the early punk singer. Randy Hoffman. I've been listening to early new wave all day long. Randy worked really hard on writing and submitting our application. So a big round of applause for Randy too. Thank you.
Now,
And
yeah.
now it's time for Megan.
Yes. So we this month are trying to raise $1,000 to support future work. It is LGBTQ History Month, the month of October. So we've been doing a ton of events. Randy did a great free walking tour. Really, Randy's carrying this whole month. And Randy's giving this great lecture tonight. So if you are able to support, even just like $5 goes a really long way for us, helps us buy like new equipment, printing costs. We're trying to get stickers. So anything you are able to do is great. The nice thing about this website, Give Butter, is they will email you a receipt with all the information you need to declare a donation on your taxes. We are an official 501c3, so you can do that. And I'm just going to leave the slide up for a few more seconds in case anybody else wants to scan the QR code. Okay, cool. Upcoming events for Queer History Month on Sunday, the 19th of October, we have an ancestor memorial. This is a really cool event that started kind of informally 4 years ago, where we go to a grave and have kind of like a memorial service for a queer Utahn who has passed. So last year we did Claire Harward. What are some others that we've done? Dorothy Graham.
The second one we did was Eva McCleary.
This is probably my favorite event that we do because there's music, there's poetry, it's really reverent but it's still educational. And this year we are honoring our namesake, Mildred Berryman, at the Bountiful Cemetery. So hope you can join us. And we're also going to be participating in the Utah Queer Film Festival. They're doing these spooky shorts, and Connell will be there giving a biographical sketch of the director behind the attack of the giant brine shrimp. So you don't want to miss that. Also very exciting is for the month of November, our big event is this Indigiqueer gathering at the Marmalade Library. This is going to be a really incredible panel of queer and two-spirit Indigenous speakers, including Clyde Hall, who's coming down all the way from Fort Hall Reservation in Idaho to talk to us. So hope you can make it to all of these. They're all on Facebook. Well, not the Indigiqueer, but it will be. Some kind of housekeeping things for this event. We are in the space of Signature Books. We're so grateful for them to host us. So please respect this space. If you would like to use the restroom, it's in the back, my right, your left corner, and it's an all-gender bathroom. We're also going to save questions and comments for the end. People on Zoom, I will be monitoring the chat. So if you want to leave questions in there, I'll make sure they get asked. And then at the end of the lecture, we will have kind of a Q&A period. So yeah, just have fun. Please respect all viewpoints. And now I'm going to introduce our amazing speaker, who is a historian of Utah's LGBTQ history, graduate student of history here at the University of Utah. Randy holds a bachelor's degree in history education from Brigham Young University, Idaho. And Randy is a former trustee of Preservation Utah and a founding member of the Mildred Berryman Institute of LGBTIQ+ Utah History. Randy's compilation and analysis of gay and lesbian organizing in Salt Lake City will be published in the Utah Historical Quarterly next year as part of the Peoples of Utah Revisited project. Through all their work, Randy strives to honor the power of storytelling, foster inclusive spaces, and build connections between the past and present that inspire community, growth, and belonging. So please welcome Randy. Okay. Let's make sure your slides get to the right spot.
Yeah, let's.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Natalie.
Let me react. That's fine. And is that showing up there?
So if you click present,
Oh, okay.
this is like weirdly finicky, and then go back to Zoom, and then click share. The trick is to click on that instead of the other one. It's like not intuitive at all. And this has happened many times. So now what you got to do is just go here.
Okay.
And
Awesome.
you should be all set.
Hey, thank you so much for coming, and thank you so much, Signature Books, for letting us have this space. There's all sorts of really great queer studies, literature over at their table. I highly recommend taking a look at it. I used some of it in my research that you'll hear. Every once in a while, a topic or a person of the past seems to reach out to us.
speak to or even with us. And for historians, we feel a special draw to uncovering and writing about that event, theme, or person. About a year ago, I felt that draw to Joe Redburn and felt that we needed to know about his life to craft together an overview of him. Once I felt comfortable with this biography, though I still amend and add to it, the application process opened for the Salt Lake City Historical Marker Program. I had always wanted an interactive sign for the Sun Tavern and Joe Redburn for passersby to learn about what was there. So many people pass by the Delta Center. It's a great education point. Being drawn to and completing, oh, thank you. Completing this bio and the start of this pilot marker program felt like kismet. Because the marker can only be 50 words or less, we're hoping for a few more words. I am happy to share a fuller overview of Joe's life now. With that, because there are thousands of memories and records of this man I have not come across yet, there is likely so much more that can be added to this, and I absolutely welcome that. Joseph Willis Redburn is a foundational yet largely forgotten architect of Utah's LGBTQ plus community. As a pioneering talk radio host and the owner of the legendary Sun Tavern, Redburn, the father of LGBTQ plus Utah, shaped the state's queer public life in the wake of Stonewall. His story is pieced together here because he was never afforded the opportunity to record his story and legacy, like so many other LGBTQ plus Utah pioneers and leaders have done. Redburn's history reveals a through line of social and institutional fragility of early LGBTQ plus organizing in the Intermountain West. Redburn's life parallels community triumphs, structural failures, and generational erasures. Joseph Willis Redburn was born in Laramie, Wyoming on the 17th of November, 1938, to Elmer Willis Redburn, his father, to mother Gerda Martina Redburn, and sister Nancy Jo and older brother Richard were also already in the house. The family stayed in Laramie and moved residences a few times. A salesman by trade, Elmer was listed in a 1959 city directory as a sales manager at Quality Chevrolet. As a student at Laramie High School, Joe was his freshman class treasurer, was on his junior prom committee, a member of the school's National Thespians Club his junior and senior years, and joined the Future Business Leaders of America during his senior year. Joe enrolled at the University of Wyoming in 1957, still in Laramie and renting out of his parents' house. During his freshman year, Joe rushed for and joined Sigma Alpha Epsilon, a college social fraternity. Joe was involved in college social events, even leading a committee charged with publicizing the senior prom during his freshman year. Joe did not graduate from the University of Wyoming, leaving after 3 semesters. His last semester was fall of 1958, his sophomore year. He had already been living at home, but stayed in Laramie for a few more months while working at his alma mater high school and before he enlisted in the U.S. Army in 1959. In those days, he would later confess, and this is a popular quote from him, if you checked the box that you were gay, they rejected you. So I didn't. I went in actually lying to them. So we know Joe, at least by high school, college, knew he was gay. Joe's voluntary enlistment was his way of avoiding the compulsory draft, completing his military service before he was thrown into it. In March of 1962, Joe began training at the Army Information School at Fort Slocum, New York, in and now owned by the city of New Rochelle. In December of the same year, Joe was promoted to sergeant and stationed at Fort Riley, Kansas, where he was the broadcast manager over the fort's regional radio and television programs and led information classes for other officers. When Joe received his honorable discharge in 1963, he was 24 years old. Joe had hoped to move to Los Angeles like many gay men were doing in the 1960s, but he would later follow an Army friend, Neil Barclay, to Salt Lake City, where he connected with work at a local radio station. Joe moved to Salt Lake City for a promising position as an announcer on KSXX radio, or KS Double, and renting a house at 1975 East Millbrook Drive. Radio programming at the time stuck to traditional formats of music and short news programs. Shortly after starting at KS Joe began pushing station owner Starley Bush to include a popular new format, two-way talk radio. By 1965, Bush set up Redburn hosting his own talk show program called Controversy, in which he discussed politics and community topics in an hour-long show. Redburn learned he could draw in listeners and callers for worse and for better. One Wyoming man, John Williams, a friend of Bush, recalls listening to Joe and taking offense at the things Joe said about Black people. At the time, Joe identified as a Goldwater conservative and later leaned further to the left, identifying as a moderate independent. Williams began to call in often to speak up and, from an oral history interview, he said, to correct some points that Joe would make about Black people, about being lazy, slothful, insolent, and stuff like that. Williams helped make Redburn's program popular, though, and the station later gave Williams his own program, bolstering the station's Black listener audience in the Intermountain West. In fact, Redburn, Williams, and other Utah Democrats attended the 1968 Chicago meeting of the Coalition for an Open Convention and aimed to send a Black representative from Utah to the Democratic Convention upon their return. Williams was appointed to lead this effort. Before Joe became a statewide radio personality, he had already become involved in local community organizing and politics. Joe made his foray into being the behind-the-scenes man to local activism, mainly anti-war protests and community issues. In 1965, for example, local teenagers took to holding unsupervised dance parties in Sugar House Park. Neighbors called the county and complained, escalating the issue to public comment at the county council. With Joe's rising popularity on local talk radio, Joe advocated for the teenagers to have their fun, ultimately leading to supervised twice-weekly dances, which ended by 10:30 p.m. In 1967, just over 2 years after working at KS Joe, now program director, and station manager Starley Bush entered into a heated disagreement about Joe's coverage on one of his episodes. In the midst of the moment and heightened rage, Joe stormed out and Starley was forced to handle Joe's live show. The University of Utah's Daily Chronicle reported the falling out and that Redburn quit the station. A few days prior, someone had written into the Daily Chronicle admonishing KS for its increasingly conservative tone, and that most liberal hosts, like Joe is becoming, and listeners were switching to KWIC. The argument between Starley Bush and Joe Redburn may have been about that shift. Also could have been about something else. Despite his gruff exterior and ability to escalate his temper, Joe was widely admired and loved. Many of those who worked with and for Joe recall having to deal with his temper and attitude lovingly. In the late 1960s, he began renting one of his first of soon-to-be many homes in the Avenues, 973 First Avenue. During this time, Joe also reached out to the University of Wyoming in Laramie to inquire about re-enrolling in undergraduate studies, but he never did return to university, even though he would later claim he graduated. Throughout the late 1960s and early 70s, Joe's political stances and affiliations changed. He evolved from a, again, self-identifying Goldwater Republican to organizing anti-war protests in Salt Lake City and frequently visiting San Francisco's Castro district, returning to Utah with inspiration. According to Joe, the Vietnam War and its anti-war movement influenced him the most, changing his opinions on war and social issues. People like Ethel Hale, Paul Wharton, and Steve Holbrook and the college, the University of Utah, converted me to join the peace movement, he said in 2007, and I did. That was our big subject on talk radio, Vietnam, Vietnam. Richard Nixon and Vietnam made talk radio and made it very popular, he said. The changes of the late 1960s and 1970s and their direct connection to the anti-war movement played a role in Redburn's life as he shifted from identifying as a conservative to a peacemonger and an independent, from hiding the deepest parts of himself to identifying publicly as gay. Joe entered broadcasting with a limited worldview and began to understand what it meant to empathize with stories outside of his reality, how, in his own words, to live as a fellow human on this planet. Joe became well connected with activists in Utah and around the nation, helped organize protest actions and events in Salt Lake City, hosted traveling protesters on his couch, and became a delegate to the 1968 Democratic Convention and was tear gassed there. It was during his radicalization in the late 1960s that Joe announced his separation from KSW. Am I behind on slides? Yeah, sorry, no, I'm caught up. I was behind. Even before becoming a bar owner, restrictive alcohol laws were a point on which Joe was quite vocal. In 1966, while still with KSW, Joe proposed ideas on his show Controversy on how to change state laws to allow bars to sell liquor rather than just beer. Joe even began organizing for a ballot initiative on the matter. Joe, later, as a bar owner, Joe would challenge raising the drinking age in Wyoming and the mandatory closing hours for Utah bars and dance clubs. In 1972, KS Double began occupying empty airspace under the call letters KLAT, or talk spelled backwards. The station was known as K-Talk and was an all-day talk radio station. Joe had a considerable following, which carried over to the new station. Tom Carlin, who would later co-own the Sun Tavern, which opened just a year after K-Talk started, also reintroduced his show, which was originally broadcast by KSW. In 1982, K-Talk adopted new call letters, KZJO, and switched back to playing music, officially ending Redburn's successful push for talk radio. During this time, the new 215 highway displaced their office space and signal towers. KZJO was able to relocate to South Jordan, though. In 1985, KZJO then became KTKK, lasting until 2017, began adopting more talk radio formats. In the 1980s and 1990s, Redburn continued again his political talk program with K-Talk, paired with the politically conservative Mills Crenshaw. Crenshaw organized a 1987 anti-tax protest at the state capitol building that was 7,000 people strong, giving him credibility and name recognition. Redburn was both admired and despised by local listeners for his liberal political views. His progressive comments on issues of the day motivated listeners to call, only increasing the popularity and viability of his shows. However, Redburn was a fixture at K-Talk from the late 1960s until the station let him go in 1993. The Salt Lake Tribune, in their obituary for Redburn, writes that station brass said they let him go because of a format change. Redburn said it was because he was openly gay and a liberal on an increasingly conservative medium. Joe was conveniently fired in 1993 when he returned home from that year's March on Washington for lesbian, gay, and bi equal rights. Allegations aside, writes Lori Butters of the Salt Lake Tribune, Mr. Redburn said he has no recourse in the state to pursue the matter further, referring to a lack of anti-discrimination statutes available for gay and lesbian Utahns, and that the station could outspend him on attorneys. Laws protecting LGBTQ plus Utahns from housing and employment discrimination, like Joe experienced, would not come until 2015. He has no plans to seek other radio work and will devote his interests full-time as the owner of a private club, Butters wrote in 1993. Joe did, however, join KWUN, heard then on 1230 AM radio, hosting a 2-hour-long morning talk program until the station closed in the early 2000s. In a twist of fate, by as late as 2007, he and Jim Kirkwood, a local conservative voice, hosted a talk show on K-Talk again. While he was in the prime, I keep forgetting to go to my slides, sorry. When he was in the prime of his radio career, though, Joe joined several other local stations, notably newer ones, to help them get started. On the 7th of December 1974, Joe commenced his show Joe Redburn on the Line with the newly established public radio station KUER. This was Joe's foray into the University of Utah campus issues and topics. Students would call in with certain concerns, and naturally, Joe became quite involved in the more controversial issues on campus, often writing into the university newspaper, the Daily Chronicle. KCGL, heard for a few years on 105.5 FM radio, started as a religiously centered music station in 1979 out of Bountiful, the first for Davis County. Shortly after the original station was destroyed in an arson incident, KCGL announced in 1981 that talk radio was back with Joe Redburn. But Joe was dropped in 1983 when the station dropped their talk radio format in favor of gospel music and Spanish programming. In 1978, when Joe likely started with KCGL, Joe ran for the state legislature to represent the Avenues neighborhood. I believe that all the Avenues and Federal Heights were District 1. As an out gay man, he lost the election 2-1 to Republican Genevieve Atwood. Throughout his career, Joe used his platform to bring on lesbian, gay, and bisexual community members and leaders, paving the way for future radio activism by the likes of Troy Williams, Becky Moss, and Jim DeBacchus. Joe had a keen sense of community, social progress, history, and would have been extremely aware of the impact of his work in radio and in the state's gay and lesbian community. In the fall of 1981, he also started his show Feedback with the new KPCW out of Park City. Host Joe Redburn, veteran in Utah broadcasting, the Park Record advertised, will lead lively discussions each week on topics that affect all Park City residents. As Joe did with any endeavor, he consumed as much of the community as he could. The commitment to and participation in the communities he talked about were extensions of his passion for organizing and for community. Joe's altruism and penchant for community building likely led him into many of these roles at newer stations who needed local celebrities to bring in listeners. Always an advocate, Joe would later help city government staff advocate for better compensation and treatment because staff felt like they could not speak up without retaliation. In 1982, Joe was appointed to the board of directors of the Utah chapter of the American Civil Liberties. Joe first lived at the Claim Jumper condominiums in Summit County until at least 1985, where several of his cassette tapes were stolen from his car. Gotta lock your car, people. And later along Highway 248, which as it runs through Park City is Kearns Boulevard. It was unclear if he was actually in Park City on Kearns Boulevard or lived outside of it where it's not Kearns Boulevard. He purchased a home at 650 White Pine Court, which according to business partner and friend Nikki Boyer was out of Joe's price range and had been sold by the time the kitchen caught fire in August of 1987. According to the park record report of the fire, Joe was living in Wyoming. I think, yeah, I'm paranoid about my slides now. I keep getting behind. It is unclear when Joe officially left KCPW, but he did move back to Laramie at the time in order to chase another dream, opening a cowboy dive bar. In 1987, Joe enthusiastically wrote into the Casper Star Tribune against Wyoming raising the legal age for alcohol consumption. He claimed to live in Laramie as the owner of the Diamond Horseshoe, a roadside motel, restaurant, and bar. Any archived records of the establishment do not mention his name, though. He wrote in twice more during the same time, but describing himself as having grown up in Wyoming and living in Park City. Regardless, by 1990, Joe was back living in Salt Lake City, this time at 973 First Avenue, where he rented when he first came to Utah in the 1960s. In 1991, he purchased 364 E Street in the Avenues neighborhood. The property was already registered as an historical landmark, but Joe led renovation projects on the home. As you saw, I was on the board of Preservation Utah. I love historic preservation. So when I found this file with his name in it that he did work to the house, I got really excited. He loves preservation, but he loves community. He loves maintaining that. The upkeep of his homes, however, and their affordability were an ongoing issue, though. He would purchase one last home in the Avenues, 415 8th Avenue, in the late 1990s and stay there until about 2013. Between 1963 and 2018, Joe moved 13 times. He eventually began moving into Salt Lake City's more affordable West Side neighborhoods after 2013. In a time before our own today, gay and lesbian gathering spaces were limited to clandestine public park spaces and restrooms and straight-owned taverns, essentially piano bars and CD lounges, like Radio City Lounge, yeah, um, the Crystal Lounge, and Golden Gate Company. Joe frequented these locations with others as he began to come out in the late 1960s and saw the need to have a space owned by and catered for the local gay and lesbian community. These are all kind of post-Stonewallish bars, even though some of them lasted until the 70s and 80s. In 2008, Joe recalled nervously opening the Sun Tavern at 400 West and South Temple in Salt Lake City at noon on the 20th of February, 1973. This is what he said. The Sun Tavern had been the railroad exchange, and I found it because that's where the anti-war people hung out. It was owned by a former Pittsburgh Steeler, and they had a sign outside. It was a Pepsi sign that said Railroad Exchange, and I changed it to say the Sun Tavern. I can remember a guy who had a bar just south who said, "You can't do that. The gay bars can't have signs." And I said, "Well, I'm going to do it anyway." That's what got me, how oppressed this community was. We were oppressing ourselves. We didn't think we could put a sign in front of a gay bar. Joe successfully and intentionally was able to show others in the state that they could organize and become visible in the process. Joe named the bar after the Midnight Sun, a new gay bar in San Francisco's Castro district, originally at 506 Castro Street, but presently at 4067 18th Street. The first gay-oriented bathhouse, Club Baths, also known as Jeff's Gym, opened in 1972, the year prior, in Salt Lake City, and Gay Liberation Front had also been organized by the students at the University of Utah in 72. Also in 72, the Salt Lake City Metropolitan Community Church arrived the same year. The Cosmic Aeroplane was a book and gift shop for the underground punk rock, hippie, and feminists of the era. While it was not specifically LGB oriented, it was a major gathering space for LGB and allied Utahns. Initially set up in the 9th and 9th neighborhood of Salt Lake City in 1967, Cosmic Airplane owners and romantic partners Steve Jones and Sherm Clow relocated to West 400 South, just in front of the Rio Grande building in 1969, and then to 366 Southwest Temple in 1974, next door to the Sun Tavern. And so the image there is them in front of the Rio Grande. You can recognize the Rio Grande there. The first gay bar in Utah was a lesbian bar called Perky's, founded by Persis Perky Melhuse in about 1970, lasting several more years. So the Sun Tavern was not the first gay bar, but maybe one of the most prolific. The Cosmic Airplane, Perky's, and the Sun Tavern introduced gay and lesbian Salt Lakers to the historic West Side, as I call it, namely between 700 West and 300 West, North Temple, and 400 South, near today's Vivint Arena, Gateway Mall, Bus Depot Transit Hub, that area. These businesses were the initial pathfinders and pioneers in a small, queer, and local economy. By this time, Joe had moved his home several more times. In 1970, he rented at 364 South State Street and then bought a house 104 West 500 North shortly after opening the Sun Tavern. With several gay and lesbian businesses in the historic West Side, other bars, clubs, restaurants, and community centers began to establish themselves nearby as an escape from downtown where gay bashings and harassment were common, and where the police participated in intimidation or turned a blind eye to it. In 1975, the Gay Community Services Center Incorporated, Utah's first LGBTQ plus community organization, opened its physical location just next door to the Sun Tavern at 11 South 400 West. A doorway was created in the wall between the Sun Tavern and the community center. The community center, though, had the wrong leaders. Staff slept and lived inside the business space, funds were mismanaged, and many people brought the wrong intentions to the new organization. It shuttered within just 2 years. By 1980, well over a dozen LGB owned and oriented businesses had set up in the neighborhood, some only lasting a year or two. By 1974, Joe and the Sun Tavern were already mired in a slight controversy. On the Sunday evening of the 22nd of December, 1974, Redburn and one of his employees, Rockney Jack Hale, were arrested for exhibiting and operating a pornographic film at the Sun Tavern without a license. Dirty. While there are several reasons why a pornographic film could have been displayed at a gay bar in the 1970s, Redburn was likely keeping up with other major gay and lesbian bars in the nation by displaying pornographic videos. A common practice of establishing a bar as a gay bar was to play gay porn, so that the second you walked in the door, you knew where you were or where you didn't want to be. Joe was brought to court in January of 1975, where he pleaded innocent. Joe was sentenced to 6 months and ordered to pay a $100 fine for exhibiting obscene motion picture. Although Judge Paul Grant suspended the jail term if the defendant, Joe, pays the fine and serves probation 12 months. Redburn took the latter option. I did not find out what happened to Rockney. This film is from Larry White, who recorded it the very last night that the Sun Tavern was open at its original location. And I do have it playing on double speed. It's kind of slow, but I got his permission to share this. It's really cool. He goes all over the inside. I'll let it go for a little bit, and then I'll talk again. Also, just as a heads up, you are about to see some of the things that happened inside a gay bar in the early 1980s. That's my warning. There's no nudity. So there was a bar at the front, and then you'll see later on there was a bar further back, and that was one of the unique attributes of this space was that it had two bars. Yeah, I'll I'll get to that, but they have similar vibes, yeah. The magic of the sun was by no means a mistake. In a city filled with sleepy, dark lounges. I'm actually gonna mute this. I didn't realize there was sound. In a city filled with sleepy, dark lounges, Redburn wanted to bring the bars and dance clubs of San Francisco and New York City to the Beehive State. These taverns, as the state called them, they were registered with the state as taverns, uh, were lounges of another era and did not have the equipment, space, or youthful energy. Yeah. Did not have the equipment, space, or youthful energy for the disco influences of the Sun, as you can see right there. Nikki Boyer reminisced that the Sun had the first disco ball and the first live DJs. It was all about the freedom we had there. It was a good time. It was a great time. earning itself the nickname the People's Bar. In a later conversation, Boyer recalls the floor of the Sun Tavern bouncing and heaving from the overcapacity dancing. Staff and Redburn wondered which would happen first. Would they all fall through the floor or be struck down by lightning? I wouldn't be surprised if some of these people in this video were struck down by lightning, some of the dirty things happening. The Sun Tavern was internationally known, revered, and had celebrities routinely patronizing, like the Osmonds every Saturday and closeted A-list celebrities who were filming in Utah. And it became the biggest and best gay bar in the West. Though Joe was emphatic the bar was for everyone. If you asked Joe if it was a gay bar, he'd say no, it's a bar for everyone. Nikki Boyer claims that the Sun Tavern was the West's answer to Studio 54. That's one of the social cards you had to have. Eventually, well, here we go. In order to work around state liquor laws, Joe and co-owners turned the Sun Tavern from a registered tavern, like I said, how the state had them registered, which limited sales to only beer, to a fraternity or a social club, opening up the permitted sale of liquor as well. In the city directories, Joe would humorously list the Sun Tavern under different names to see if anyone would notice, but these were names under which the new social club was organized. Then in 1978 and 1982, he listed the Ritz Corporation with himself as president, John Gatzemeyer as vice president, and Tom Carlin as secretary. Another time, he listed the Sun Tavern as the Royal Order of the Sun. According to state records, Redburn also owned the Rainbow Corporation, which may have been an umbrella LLC for himself. I meant to say one of my favorite parts of this video is Larry turns into certain rooms and corners and everyone just kind of like stops what they were doing and is like really stiff and awkward. They were doing something before. By the early 1980s, Salt Lake City government had eyed the block where the Sun Tavern was located for the Delta Arena and pressured Joe and other businesses on the block to vacate their buildings or be forced out when the city condemned the structures. In 1983, Joe's hand was forced and he moved the Sun Tavern to 727 West 200 South, colloquially called the Sun 2.0, and construction on the new Delta Arena began. State Senator Jim DeBacchus, upon Joe's death, recalled feeling overwhelmed visiting the Sun Tavern for the first time after graduating from Brigham Young University in the mid-1970s. He never knew that there were so many gay people, let alone so many just in Utah. The Sun was respite and escape for all, every day of the week in an isolated and vitriolic state. Noted historian D. Michael Quinn also recalled visiting the Sun Tavern, once while the focus of an LDS church witch hunt, and another time with his daughter and her friends after he was excommunicated and out of the closet. He writes about that in his memoir that you can buy today from Signature Books. I've read it. It's actually really great. I highly recommend. Church leaders would later inquire why we went to the Sun, Quinn writes in his memoir, letting on that they were following and spying on him, as they likely were with many others. BYU security was known to visit the bar, ask for identification in order to catch students or church members, or look for BYU parking permits hanging from their mirror, and to write down license plate numbers in the parking lot. Yeah, something happened in that scene. Staff could easily identify them, and especially when BYU security presence was too large and frequent than Joe and staff preferred, it's pretty easy to pick out the BYU security staff at the Sun Tavern. They would flirt with them and make lewd comments like, "So, you here to fuck?" Making the security officials so uncomfortable they would leave. It's a lovely bathroom. I would rather just hold it. I am going to go on to the next slide. Sorry, I tried to read a little slow. It didn't finish. But this is available on social media. It's been kind of making the rounds every few years. It pops up in my feed. Oh. In addition to the Sun Tavern, Joe opened the Trap in 1991, a gay bar with a country western flair. He sold the bar several years later when the 1999 one-off tornado destroyed the second location of the Sun Tavern. The new owners of the Trap changed the bar's name to the Sun Trap to honor the legacy of Redburn and his Sun Tavern. And that's something I see a lot. There were two separate locations of the Sun Tavern at different times, and then Joe decided to open a second business, the Sun Trap, which is still around.
Joe opened this.
Yeah. And then sold it a few years later.
Or did he open it as the Trap, right?
He opened it as the Trap. And then 1999, tornado hit and shut down the Sun Tavern, and the owners then changed the name to the Sun Trap. 99. The damage brought on by the 1999 tornado was too substantial for Joe to repair. The roof was severely damaged and the walls were compromised. Nikki Boyer stated that about $100,000 worth of lighting had already been installed, and repairing the building, which was already in poor condition when they bought it, was beyond what they could take on. Boyer calls the building a turn-of-the-century dump. I think that sums it up. You get a good visual. Joe decided not to reopen the location, ending the 26-year-long chapter of the Sun Tavern. To be exact, 26 years, 5 months, 27 days. By the end of the 20th century, well over 30 bars, clubs, shops, bathhouses, and community centers had existed or were still operating out of this area, including his Sun Trap, a tradition started by Joe and his son. The Sun persisted for the better part of 3 decades at a moment when gay liberation, coming out, and community building were the names of the game, were the names of the movement and the game, and when most Salt Lake City gay and lesbian businesses hardly lasted 4 years. I think I got behind. So that's the damage done to the second location of the Sun.
And the North Visitor Center on Temple Square.
Yeah. And
So
you
the
can
Mormons couldn't say anything.
finding my spot. By now, the Sun Trap has outlasted the Sun Tavern and is the longest running gay bar in the state. Club Triangles, opened in 2002, is also on track to surpass the Sun Tavern within a few years. Joe Redburn was a pillar of early gay and lesbian Utah, and the Sun Tavern was a physical manifestation of his role. Starting in 1973, when he opened the Sun Tavern, Redburn began hosting beer keggers and barbecue events, which are now seen as the first prototypes of Pride. In the immediate aftermath of the Stonewall riots, gay liberation spread as both a movement and definition of a new era. The focus was on normalizing same-sex love and romance, encouraging more people to come out and change public opinion, and to liberate people with honest and open lives. In 1974, Redburn knew this and began advertising a beer bust kegger event on the shores of the Great Salt Lake. Careful not to use the words gay, lesbian, or pride in the marketing, a popular cruising and hangout joint, local gays and lesbians gathered at Bare Ass Beach on the south end of the lake at about 8800 West. So North Temple and like 8800 West. Northeast of the Saltaire venue. The location was experimental and did not fare well due to the smell from the lake and the flies. Surprise. I don't have a lot of images of what I'm talking about, so I have some stuff from the archives, old ads and photos. Redburn, Boyer, and other gay bar owners and community leaders decided to bring the gatherings into the city. Redburn told Q Salt Lake that we started having keggers up City Creek Canyon, and that kind of started everyone thinking, since gay pride was getting started around the country, that we should do more. Living up to his paternal role, Joe saw the need for community members to get out of the bar, to express their genuine selves in safe but public spaces. Joe wanted to see good, Boyer explains. He wanted to get people out of the bar. An official Gay Freedom Day was held on the 1st of June, 1975 in City Creek Canyon. Succeeding summer events were mostly held in May on Memorial Day weekends in various parks around the city. Joe likely patterned the tradition of the Labor Day celebrations he had organized earlier. These events grew over the course of 1975 and 76, that a festival and human rights conference were held in 1977. While responsibility for these events shifted every year from one bar owner to another, I keep looking away and losing my spot. Much of the funding and organizing still came from Joe Redburn's personal pockets and staff. Later, Joe opened up the Sun Tavern for Pride events and his free annual steak fry event every 4th of July. Summer and Pride celebrations became a community staple. Some view 1978, 79, and the 1980s as a fragmentation of community into various organizations. However, what Redburn inspired and founded was a much more organized, ambitious, focused community of gay and lesbian Utahns. Joe was recognized for his work in organizing early Pride and gay and lesbian events and spaces in 1983 with the Royal Court of the Golden Spike Empire's Community Service Award. By the mid to late 1990s, groups rented out the Northwest Rec Center one year and the Utah State Fairgrounds another year, indicating substantial growth and popularity in these summertime events for the local LGBTQ+ and ally community. Joe later rented a neighboring space, which he sub-rented out to groups for events and meetings. Whereas there was only one other brick and mortar community organization for Utah's gay and lesbian community at the time, the East Room, as it was called, is seen as one of the first community centers in LGBTQ+ Utah history. Groups and organizations like Gay Community Services Center Incorporated, the Royal Court of the Golden Spike Empire, established in 76, Wasatch Leatherman and Motorcycle Club would use this East Room space to meet, counsel, organize, plan, and celebrate and gather. The Unity Show was the brainchild of the late Chuck White. The variety show brought together various organizations, activists, and leaders to introduce their cause, solicit donations, and perform a fun skit or musical number for the crowd. I think it'd be fun to bring it back. In the evenings, the East Room was the more conversational area of the bar. Eventually, Joe brought on different co-owners and managers. Joe also helped out those he knew by giving them a job at the Sun, which was incredibly true to Joe's altruistic nature. This also bled his finances and led to poor service at times. Several drag queens of the 1980s worked at the Sun, and many who died of AIDS-related illnesses noted they worked for Joe when they could not find a job or were on hard times. Throughout the 1980s, 90s, and early 2000s, memorial services were held at the Sun Tavern and Sun Trap for locals who died of AIDS-related causes. When money was tight, often while running on uppers, Joe would go through a round of layoffs, only to hire many of the same people back a week or two later. At times, this was cutting back. More often, though, it was to keep more profit for himself for a while by not paying the extra staff. This became a standard routine that everyone expected and tolerated. Early on, Nikki Boyer was one of those regularly fired and rehired. Later, she was brought on as an owner, and Joe would take out loans from the Bank of Boyer, as Nikki calls herself. Around the time the Sun Tavern was forced to move, Joe rented another home in the Federal Heights neighborhood of Salt Lake City, 1384 East Perry Avenue. It was at this home where Nikki Boyer became a roommate of Joe's. Already a friend and business partner with Joe, Nikki knew Joe's personal habits. She affectionately describes Joe as never having a mind for housework. Joe was never attentive to maintaining a clean space and was always more focused on his work, his friends, and business, which all coincided with his passions. Likewise, the Sun Tavern was also not well maintained. Redburn prioritized social connection and public impact over domestic routines and material comfort. In order to maintain a semblance of cleanliness and to pay rent in his preferred affluent neighborhoods, Joe would find as many roommates as possible to help clean and pay rent. He was usually forced to find somewhere else to live once the landlord eventually forced him out or the roommates all left, or when the homes he owned became too expensive for his irresponsibly managed funds. From Nikki's recollection, living in the Federal Heights house with Joe and his roommates, they were all alike in their lack of hygiene and cleaning habits. These were not coincidentally the same male characters to whom Joe was attracted. Nikki jokingly once commented that Joe must wait outside the prison and wait for men to be released to, to pick up new roommates and tricks. He he never directly responded to that, and it became an ongoing suspicion. Joe, Nikki, and the others moved out of the Federal Heights house when the owner moved back in full time and when Joe began working for KPCW and living in Summit County. So, why would a successful radio host and business owner move from one rental to another, live in unhygienic conditions, and exhibit all signs of no success? Why would one of the state's most successful radio personalities and business owners later live in poverty? In an area where a gay bar could hardly last 2 years, Joe's ongoing success should have afforded him immense, if not adequate, comfort and stability. But all public records point to the contrary. The Sun Tavern was raking in extra funds. Some nights it was 1,000% over capacity. When the fire marshal made everyone leave, staff would wait until authorities left and just let everyone back in. After a successful weekend or night at the Sun Tavern, Joe often took the remaining profits and spent them freely, investing not in future plans or business expansion, but in the present moment and whatever drew his interest or affection at the time. While others in his position might have saved, reinvested, or structured their earnings toward long-term goals, Joe simply lived differently. I know I sound critical, but that's just the way he was. Financial planning and conventional business strategies were never priorities for him. He focused instead on the people around him and the energy of the present, managing his life and livelihood with spontaneity, generosity, and a disregard for material accumulation that was uniquely his own. Joe Redburn's legacy is best understood not by scrutinizing every choice he made, but by looking at the impact he left behind. Nikki Boyer, his longtime friend and collaborator, explained that rather than focusing on Joe's less admirable choices, we should pay attention to his wake. Like the enduring ripples left behind a passing boat, Joe's influence continues to shape the community he helped steer into existence. He presented himself as a role model. He never presented himself as a role model. He was the one who showed up again and again to fight for equality, build spaces for belonging, and call others into visibility. His life may not have followed a traditional arc of success or stability, but the wake he left is wide, powerful, and ongoing. The good he did in building Utah's early gay and lesbian community is irrefutable. The thriving scene of LGBTQ plus, I'm wrapping it up. That's kind of long. The thriving scene of LGBTQ plus bars, clubs, and shops that Joe helped establish had led to a dip in his own business before the tornado struck in 1999. Joe receded to the background of Salt Lake City gay life and culture following the tornado incident and closure of his Sun Tavern. He was in his early 60s by time he had sold off the Sun Trap and when the Sun Tavern was destroyed. Public records indicate that Joe moved to 806 South Jefferson Street around 2003 in the Ballpark neighborhood. Joe was a frequent patron of nearby Triangles and knew the owner and staff. As was the case all his life, whatever personal troubles Joe experienced, they never took priority. Everyone who knew Joe can speak to his personality, business, and leadership style and his presence. Almost no one can speak to the personal details of his life, his childhood memories, his love interests, or what generally worried him. What is evident in first and second-hand accounts of Joe is that he always prioritized others and did everything he could to care for those who were in front of him, even if it meant sharing jokes and facilitating a good time. Again, I don't have a ton of images. Joe's last residence was in the Poplar Grove neighborhood at 957 West Euclid Avenue, several blocks behind the Sun Trap, approximately from 2018 to 2019. Close friends recount his social media presence ceasing completely around this time. This would have likely been when Joe developed dementia, and he could no longer function. The father of the Utah gay and lesbian community now became homeless. Nikki Boyer, Deb Hall, and others kept an eye out for Joe when driving around the city and passing encampments. Joe came into the Sun Trap in August of 2020 when the owner, Frank Chug, noticed the physical state he was in, commenting that he was, quote, obviously experiencing homelessness. Chug contacted the royal court of the Golden Spike Empire to see what could be done. With no major resources available for LGBTQ plus seniors, Marty Pendry Struthers, a Washington County resident and former radio program host, started a GoFundMe for Joe. The efforts only raised $2,000, and it is not clear if Joe ever received it. 1 month later, Joe was found unresponsive at the South Salt Lake Men's Resource Center. He reportedly died of natural causes at Intermountain Medical Center. Joe has no gravesite to visit. A few local gay men intervened to ensure he received the respect and dignity in his afterlife care. Because he was homeless and had no next of kin, Joe was likely cremated and later scattered. On the loss of Joe, Marty Pendry Struthers wrote, "How do you put into words that his bigger-than-life presence could either scare you or educate you or both? I truly think that not only have we just lost a powerful and unforgettable human being, but we also lost part of our community's heart, an icon, a leader, a presence, and a deep, intelligent voice. But most of all, we lost a beautiful friend." Gene Gieber, owner of Club Triangles, also reflected on Joe. "I first met Joe in 1981 when I repaired his sound system in the original Sun. We had a sarcastic and fun relationship throughout the years. On Sunday afternoons, we would get into beer buying wars on the patio at Backstreet, a gay bar. After opening Triangles, we would trade friendly jabs at each other in our weekly ads. At Off Tracks, another bar, we named our grilled ham and cheese the Rita Redburn. That was Joe's nickname. He ordered one every time he came in. To say that Joe was an icon of the community is not enough. He was the gay community." During the early 2000s, the owners of the Sun Trap nearly sunk the business. Today, Mary Peterson has revived the bar. While she has made the Sun Trap a space for all once more, in the last few weeks, Peterson has not necessarily followed Joe's passion for community, fairness, and support of fair labor practices. Joe Redburn should not have died alone. The man who arguably did more than anything else to foster Utah's early LGBTQ plus community spent his final years without a home, a safety net, or the very community he helped create. His story is not only one of triumph and vision, but also a stark reminder of the fragility of queer institutions and the recurring marginalization of LGBTQ plus elders. As researchers Hoy Ellis, Ator, Kerr, and Milfer write, contacts between youth and elders are not intrinsic elements of LGBTQ plus social systems. LGBTQ plus knowledges, histories, and cultures are lost or disavowed from generation to generation. Redburn's life and death illustrate this connection as more than a generational drift. It is a structural failure rooted in the legacies of exclusion, stigma, and survivalism that shaped queer life in the 20th century. His absence in our final records and rituals is not simply a personal tragedy, but a communal one. To remember Joe is to confront the impermanence of queer spaces, the costs of activism without infrastructure, and the need to build more durable, inclusive systems of care, ones which will not forget the people who made our very freedoms possible. And yet, despite the losses and oversights, Joe Redburn's influence endures. Joe, the Sun Tavern, and the community he fosters is proof that despite never being interviewed for his own history, the narrative exists. We just need to recapture it. Joe fostered, developed, and gave everything he had to Utah's emerging LGBTQ plus community, often at great personal cost. His contributions laid the great groundwork for the visibility, vibrancy, and activism that followed. That the community he helped create could not sustain him in his final years remains a profound sorrow, which I hope we all carry and use as motivation. But the wake he left behind, his courage, his insistence on joy and visibility, his radical commitment to making space, continues to ripple outward. Remembering Joe is not simply an act of honoring the past, it is a call to care more fully for those who have paved the way. Thank you. We're doing questions? Hit it.
Thank you for that wonderful presentation. I was just hoping to get, could you spell out for me the concurrent timelines of Joe doing the radio stuff and Joe managing a bar? Like, because it wasn't one then the other, they were happening at the same time,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It did seem as Joe, his radio career gradually declined. There's kind of an overlapping, like, then the gay bar takes off. And then 99. But he still did radio into the early 2000s a little bit.
And I'm curious to hear too, you had like kind of dropped in there that he was very conservative and then he kind of shifted. Do you attribute that to Vietnam? Like, is that kind of your impression or?
Yeah, it seems like he attributes that to Vietnam. I think it was that whole zeitgeist that really radicalized him of the late 60s, early 70s. And that's when he started on radio. So he's paying attention to current events, he's interviewing people, he's paying attention and kind of waking up.
So Joe died in 20.
Yeah.
Did anybody here go to the Sun 1.0? Mommy, Sheila, Dad.
I couldn't get in, I wasn't old enough. I was inspired to go.
Bonnie, what did you say?
I aspired,
You did not.
but I didn't have my fake ID till
And to the Sun 2.0?
Yeah.
I was a goth go-go boy at the Sun 2.0.
Yeah.
Black wooden boxes, and I would get up on the box and dance and lip sync.
I kind of remember him on the radio.
Yeah.
That was one of the things I forgot to include was like there are a couple oral histories or interviews on YouTube where he was interviewed. And I wanted to share. It's like, it is truly a like brassy, booming voice that just fills out the space. I talked to Becky Moss recently, and she said that Joe had asked her to come over to start a show on his radio network. But she was very uninterested because, again, it was talk radio. It was like, I can't think of the words right now, but just it made people listen for worse, usually for worse, because it's so crass and confrontational. I mean, his first show is called Controversy, and Becky just didn't want to be part of that.
We do have a Zoom chat.
Oh, sorry.
Says, fantastic speech, Randy. What a devastating end to such a community-driven life. Are you able to share with us what you expect to put on the historical marker for the original tavern location?
Yeah, word got back to us. They're only allowing 50 words, so it is pretty short. It's basically this address, Joe Redburn opened this bar. It was important. It's a little nicer than that, but right now it is pretty short. So it might just be that we're hoping in our meeting when we talk about it, we're hoping we can get a few more words. Yeah, 50 seems very small for a public history marker.
Will, do you have any sense of why it's?
It's the first time that the city's
Yeah.
doing this, so they're learning as they're going through the process. So I think that you guys have an opportunity to maybe open their minds.
Yeah.
Okay.
So.
Yeah. I don't know what marker they have picked out. It's the city doing it, and they've never really done markers before.
So it looks a little bit like if I may.
Yeah.
Because I've seen it. It looks a little bit like have you seen the Pioneer ones?
The DUP?
It looks a little bit like that in its shape, but at the top it's got the Salt Lake City Sago Lily. It's gonna be made out of the same material, and then it's metal. I assume about the same size.
Oh.
Yeah. So it's pretty looking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll figure it out.
Will it have something that will let you go somewhere for more information?
That's
a brass QR code or something?
Yeah, I was gonna ask about that. Yeah, I don't know if you can do, like, it would be cool to do like a full website on the Sun Tavern.
Yeah.
I've never seen a brass QR code, but I did have that vision as well. I don't know if that's possible, but that would be cool.
There are gravestones
Oh, true, yeah.
that have them, and you can,
Really?
and you can do the QR code off the gravestone.
I think they're part of
The biography of the person.
it's like an app or a program. So it gets maintained and they maintain the URLs. Because that's what I worry about with a QR code that's going to be up for 50 years. Is the website going to be up for the whole time? Cool.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.